Well, welcome everyone to tonight's History Talk. Tonight we actually have a fairly special history talk because it's not a local community, well, a local community member, but it's not a long-term local community member that's going to be speaking with us tonight. It's actually one of our former interns here at the museum, Brendan Gallion, who interned with us last fall, and as a part of his internship, he decided to research the history of astronomy in Champaign County, and as part of that, uncovered the story of the Vermillion River Observatory. Brendan is a junior majoring in journalism and minoring in history at the University of Illinois, and he currently serves as sports editor for the Daily Illini and as an intern with the Society of American Baseball Research, also called SABR. Now, let's welcome Brendan as he talks about the Vermillion River Observatory.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Yeah, that was pretty much what I was going to do on my first slide, just introduce myself. This is me up at the site in February. I went up there as a part of my research for the last blog that I wrote, which was the general history of astronomy in Champaign County. I took some pictures of the site, and I'm going to be using a lot of those tonight in preparation for the second blog post, which is pretty much going to be just this talk tonight. Now, before we get to the observatory itself, I just wanted to talk a little bit about history of campus observatories. So when the university opened in 1867 as Illinois Industrial University, the first observatory quickly followed. By 1873, it was already in place. It wasn't a real professional operation. It was a queer bobtail house down by the mechanical building. The only thing it had was a chronometer. Again, not a very professional, well-built thing. It was just kind of like a ramshackle place. And you might be wondering, what does any of that mean? What is a chronometer? Where's the mechanical building? So a chronometer is this thing here. It's kind of just like a, it's like a very precise navigational clock. It was very standard in observatories at the time. So good that they had a good one, because you needed something like that back then. And then the mechanical building, this is one of the very first maps of the university. This is Springfield. That's still there today. This is Wright, and then this is Matthews right here. The mechanical building was right here and kind of in between Wright and Matthews. So there's not an exact location for the observatory. It was just near this area. If I had to guess, I would say probably somewhere here near the Arboretum, because that's where they put the next observatory, just in the middle of a common space like that. And then today, that is the Granger Library, where the mechanical building was then, in case you needed a sense of that. But again, that was just very small, not like a very professional observatory. All they had was pretty much that clock and nothing serious. I guess the most important event, the only event that was written down and survives today from that first observatory, is that a couple people went to try to watch a lunar eclipse. They got there, they found the door locked, and it turns out the key was in a professor's pocket, and the professor was in Bloomington. So they were not able to get in, and they had to go elsewhere to see it. And that was pretty much it for the first observatory. By 1882, a new one was already in place, but again, it wasn't very good. It wasn't up to standard for what they needed at the university, especially a university like this. It was better than the old one. It had 2 instruments instead of just the one, but still not very good. Now this one, we do know exactly where it was. It was right here where the quad is today, in between the English building, and I think that's Noyes. It was just in the middle of the quad. Very small building, again, not nearly sufficient. They were complaining about it since pretty much its inception. Just not what it should be for what the university was. So eventually, people got together in 1895, and they said, we are a real university. We're going to start going into scientific progress, so we need a real observatory. So they started drafting plans for a more permanent observatory, and this is what we have on campus today still. 130 years later, it had 4 rooms, an office, and then kind of like a computation room, a nice lobby, and then on top of that was a dome where the big telescope was and still is today. And this was meant, again, to be much more permanent, something truly deserving that the university deserved. So they raised the money for that. Where are you going to put something like that? You can't put it on the quad, because by now the quad's getting a couple buildings around it. So they look around and they find, near the Morrow plots, which are there at this time, there's a raised kind of embankment, and they said that's perfect. So that's where they put it. They built this. You can kind of see it's a little higher than the land around it. And there's no lights at the time. You don't have to worry about light pollution. You can just put it, right here in the middle of campus. There's going to be no problems observing anything. And they were so enthusiastic about this new permanent observatory They started work on it in April of 1896, and they were done by August. 4 months. Built it so quickly, in fact, that the telescope had not even arrived by the time they had finished. The telescope didn't get there till November, so they had to wait around a couple months to actually use it for observational purposes. Now, when it opened, it was under the direction of George Myers, and he stuck around for all 4 years before taking a job in Chicago. Then it was kind of without a director for a couple years. So they had to look around, and they found in California Dr. Joel Stebbins. Now, he came over to head the observatory, and he kind of found a mess. There was no independent astronomy department, and as such, there was no independent budget. So he had to spend $8 literally out of his own pocket to get some equipment, and this just fed him off so much that he went straight to the board, and he said, we got to do something about this. And so the astronomy department was born. He was in charge of that too. And the observatory and this new budget that he got, which he really needed, allowed him to kind of take off in terms of scientific progress. He worked with Fay C. Brown on selenium cell photometry, which basically this is a photometer right here. I don't know much about science and astronomy, so I'm not going to try to explain it to you guys, but it's basically using electricity to map out the brightness of celestial objects, and that's what they're doing here. This is some of the very first work in that, and they did it here at the campus observatory with that independent budget that they got because Stebbins had to spend $8 out of his own pocket. Now, he stuck around for a couple years after that, and then Robert Horace Baker took over as director, and he was more interested in purely observational stuff, so he was using the telescope, he was doing star surveys with Ivy League schools. But under him, they went through the Great Depression, we went through World War II, so the budget kind of fell back down, and he kind of turned away from observational astronomy towards textbook writing, which he was very good at. They used textbooks that he wrote in colleges across the country. In fact, after he left, they would use his textbooks at the school. But by this point, the budget's waning. He's not really doing anything because there is no budget. He's teaching just 2 classes. The telescope isn't being used at all. He's not using it for his classes. School groups are using it to look at and visit, but it's not really being used. So at this point, the university is seriously considering removing the department. This is in 1950. He had a long tenure because through Depression, through World War II, and towards the end of it, they knew that they would have to do something about it. So the dean of the College of LAS, Henning Larsen, wrote a letter to the director of the Harvard Observatory, Harlow Shapley, and he said, we got a problem. What should we do here? He didn't particularly want to eliminate the program, but they couldn't keep, spending all this money when nothing's happening. And Shapley quickly wrote back and told him that it would be a shock to the American astronomical world if an institution as prestigious as Illinois, that had so much scientific progress under Stebbins just decades before, would get rid of their whole department. So that really convinced Larsen, and he changed course and started the search for a new director. His top candidate was British cosmologist George Cunliffe McVitie. He was teaching at Queen Mary's College in London, and before that, he had taught at King's College London. And while he was there, one of his students was a young Arthur C. Clarke, and he left such an impact on Clarke that, after he grew up and he wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, he decided that HAL 9000 would be born in Urbana as homage to McVitie, to his one-time math professor. So if you're ever wondering why HAL 9000 is from Urbana, it's because of George McVitie, because he taught Arthur C. Clarke in London. But anyway, back in 1951, McVitie's weighing this over. He's lived in England his whole life. It's going to be a really big decision for him to come over to America to start a whole new career. So he writes a letter looking for advice again to Harlow Shapley, the Harvard director. And again, he gives some very good advice. He tells him that it seems to me that you're going to Illinois is the first step in something that may go further. And indeed, how right he was. So McVitie arrives here in 1952 to take over as astronomy head and observatory director. The students call him Dr. Mack, and he was a classical European professor. He would walk in, start writing on the blackboard, and that's all he would do all class. He had no textbook. He really didn't talk that much. It was just writing on the blackboard, erasing it, filling it up again, and he would do that about 4 or 5 times per class. And despite that, the students loved him. He was well respected. He was very affable. He held Christmas parties every year for the students and staff. And looking through the correspondence, it's clear that many of the students at the time look back on the McVitie days as like a very fun, fun time. They told stories about they would hang around the observatory late at night, and the phone would ring, and it would be citizens calling and asking what just happened. I just saw something in the sky. What was it? Turns out it was the moon covered by clouds. And another thing that happened under McVitie that all the students talked about, Sputnik was launched in 1957. The story goes that McVitie was at home enjoying dinner with a couple faculty members, and he gets a call from university PR asking, like, what is the astronomy department's thoughts on this new Russian satellite, to which he responds, what satellite? He had no idea. So he gets up, he runs out of his house, he goes and tries to find whatever students he can and rallies them so that they can try to track this thing. And they are able to in the back, behind the observatory in that back area, that grass patch. So a lot of fun under him. But at the same time, McVitie is having some trouble in terms of like his research. He came over here to do partially some observational research, but he's quickly discovering that the Midwest is not a great place for that. As we all know, it's cloudy quite often, and you can't observe much when it's cloudy. It's also an awful place in terms of atmospheric turbulence. The air above is just not great to see stars. So he's having some problems with that. He really doesn't know what he's going to do. In 1954, so a couple years before Sputnik, Ed Jordan pays him a visit. Ed Jordan is just an electrical engineering professor, and he asks him, he says, hey, I heard that it's not going great with observational astronomy. Have you considered radio astronomy? And he hadn't, truthfully. And Jordan really didn't have much experience in that. But the two got to talking, and they figured that it would be a nice way for the university to kind of put itself on the map in terms of like scientific research in America, because there wasn't really much radio astronomy, observation, stuff like that going on in America at this time. There was some international, but it hadn't really hit America yet. So Jordan kind of saw this as the chance to put Illinois on the map in terms of that. So they got together, they started planning this out, and they quickly realized that neither one of them knew anything about radio astronomy at all. So they had to find somebody else. They found George Swenson. He was a Michigan-born Eagle Scout. He had been teaching at the University of Alaska, where he established their radio astronomy program, and he kind of developed it into one of the leading in the nation. He went back home to Michigan State to teach there, and that's when he got a call from McVitie and Jordan, asking if he wanted to head the new Illinois radio astronomy department, which he did. So he came over in 1957, and their first task for him was to get as far away as possible. They sent him on a worldwide tour of radio astronomy sites to kind of see what they were doing wrong, and just take notes for what we're going to do here to put ourselves on the map. So he goes to Europe, he goes to Australia, he goes to New Zealand, he even goes to the Soviet Union to just look at all these sites and figure out what they should do at Illinois. So he gets back, they have a meeting, and this is what they come up with. The Vermillion River Observatory site, 600 feet by 400 feet. This is just a model, of course. This is made up by students in the newly formed Astronomical Society. This one's actually just 3 feet by 4 feet. But so they wanted something, a parabolic like valley. These would be like the antennas and the receivers, and it would kind of just like map the sky. Their goal with this was to map the sky at 610 megahertz, just a different frequency. There had been mapping projects before, just none quite at this frequency. That was kind of their goal with this project. And obviously it's going to be a massive, massive undertaking to build something this huge. So they had a list of problems to take care of before they could even start thinking about this. The first is, where is it going to go? I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's pretty flat around here. So they had to find somewhere that they could kind of use the shape of the land already. McVitie said that the cheapest building material is earth. So they wanted somewhere that was already kind of shaped like a valley, so they wouldn't have to remove all that dirt. And they looked in a 100-mile circle, and the only place they could really find was a swath of land south of Danville, near the Vermillion River. Just kind of looked like this, hilly. There was a part of it that was, close enough. It just, obviously all these trees were in the way, but so that's where they figured it would go. So they got that taken care of. They started looking around campus for solutions to what else they were going to do in terms of the tech. They found Professor John Dyson, who had actually already been working on conical antennas, and they said those will be great for what we're going to do. So they used those in that's like what's on top of those wooden towers. That's where they put those. So they used just lucky. They got lucky that someone on campus was already doing that. And then McVitie himself had to worry about funding. Who's going to pay for this? Because the university really wasn't. They were still kind of trying to recover from those budget cuts that almost left the program non-existent. So he asked around to a couple different organizations, and eventually he finally got enough funding from the Office of Naval Research. So in 1959, it was all systems go on the observatory. Now the first thing they had to do was clear out all the trees. Now they could have hired a professional work crew to do it, but that would have cost money. So instead, they sent their best and brightest astronomy PhD students, the A team. So this is Ron Shorn. He arrived on campus as a physics major. He didn't particularly enjoy it. Was walking around the quad one night, walked past the observatory. He heard the dome moving, said, wow, that looks fun. He went inside and he just loved it so much that he switched to astronomy. And by this time, he is pursuing a PhD in it. He was always on the lookout for creatures of the forest while working at the site, but nobody there ever saw anything more than a squirrel. And here he's making bark tea, which was a favorite of many at the site. It's just tea with tree bark in it, which was unavoidable at the time, but that's what they made. This is Ray White. He was obviously another PhD student. He earned his bachelor's at the university in 1955, went to the Army Corps of Engineers, and then came back in 1958 to pursue a PhD in astronomy. And then this is Charlie Wolf, who is about to embark on a 50-year career at NASA, but I don't know if he knows that yet. So here's what they would do. Every Saturday for most of 1959, they met at the campus observatory, which by this point had undergone a bit of a renovation. They added some rooms back here, and then they did a little work to the inside, obviously, because by this point it's already 60 years old, even in the 1950s. So they met here every Saturday at 7 a.m. The only people that had cars were the PhD students, so they have to cram all the undergrads in with them. Usually about 10 to 15 people would go on these. They'd meet here at 7. They'd go off to Baker's Dozen Donuts, which is near where Carl Hospital is today. They'd get donuts, they'd get coffee, and then they'd go off to the site. So what did they have with them? They had a 2-man crosscut saw, they had some axes, and they had one chainsaw, all of this borrowed from the University Physical Plant. They also had OFF, which had just hit the shelves 2 years prior, so that was very lucky for them. What they did not have was forestry knowledge. Again, they were just astronomy students. They had no real civil engineering knowledge. They didn't really even experience cutting down trees. So they went to the library, they read some forestry books, and that's about all they did before they just started cutting all the trees down. They stopped using the chainsaw after a couple weeks. They didn't enjoy it very much, so they were just using the hand saws and the axe for most of the year. They said it was the secret to building the pyramids, what they were doing. So they're cutting down all these trees. They're being stuck with all these logs now, and they're trying to think what they can do with them. They could burn them, but that would take a lot because, again, it's this giant 400 by 600 foot valley to clear all these trees. So they're trying to think what they could do with them when Swenson himself suggests that they could just build a log cabin. I mean, after all, it was the land of Abe Lincoln. Now, he might have just been giving them something to do so they could stay out of the way of the important work, but they loved it. They thought it was a great idea, so that's exactly what they started to do with all the logs that were piling up. And it was fun work, yeah, like all these guys are enjoying it, having fun, but that doesn't mean it wasn't dangerous. So on February 22nd, 1959, one of the first days out there, George Washington's birthday actually, Ray White is using his little Boy Scout hatchet to cut some trees, and he accidentally hits his shin, and they say he almost decapitated it. I don't know if it was that serious, but here he is pointing at the scar that he got from that. He did narrowly avoid amputation on his left leg. And then this is actually the hatchet. That's Ron Shorn using it to shape up the cabin. Now, instead of a couple of weeks after this, instead of oh man, are you okay? They all thought this was so funny that they made an award out of it. Now, this isn't the best picture. The frame is kind of glary, but they made the Klinkerfues Award, which was the highest air grade for stupidity awarded by the UIUC. They thought it was so funny they made a whole award out of it that they would give out every year. Now, obviously, White earned the first one for nearly cutting his own leg off. The second one, given a year later in 1960 to Charlie Wolf, because he never wore cotton work gloves. They said he was too cheap to buy them. So every day, every Saturday, he would leave the site with bloody hands. They thought that was great too. A year later, Ron Shorn earned it, 1961. Actually, this was a special ceremony. They'd already given one out in 1961 for something that happened on campus to somebody not in this story. But they had a special Christmas ceremony for Ron's cowardly and brutish behavior. And of course, you're wondering, what did he do? Well, his wife had gone into labor, and instead of sticking with her, he went to the site to install window frames on the cabin. Clearly had his priorities in order. But through all that, they were getting it done. Originally, the plans called for them to have the valley cleared by Thanksgiving. They didn't. It was a very rainy, very wet winter and fall, so the site was just unworkable in the mud. They said the mud was so bad that it ripped the soles off their shoes. And having gone out there, it is at times. I mean, it is just a river valley, so they had to wait. Actually, they couldn't work at all from November till the next April. But they did get it cleared, and they got it ready for the real crews to come in and start working on everything. And also by this time, the site's kind of becoming like a tourist attraction. In the same way that Swenson went on his worldwide tour, researchers are now coming to Danville to see what's going on. This is Swenson. This is Y.T. Lowe. He's with the university. He designed the kind of array that the antennas are going to be positioned on. And then this is another university professor, and then this is a visiting Russian professor just kind of touring the site. And so in April 1960, they start putting up the wooden towers. You can just see in this picture how muddy it is. I mean, there's just still water down there. They tried to dig. There's a concrete channel in the middle. That certainly helped to divert the water away, but again, not a total solution. And it is at this point, after they do all that, they're behind schedule, that they run into the first of a few serious problems. The Federal Communications Commission says that actually they can't use this frequency that they were planning on using. It had been set aside during a 1959 international meeting to just kind of as used for radio astronomy, but the Federal Communications Commission said that they were not a part of that, and that in America they were planning on using the frequency for commercial television broadcasts. So they had no knowledge of this meeting. They had no knowledge that it was set aside. So this was a years-long debate. They actually didn't settle this until after the site opened, but eventually they did, and the university won. They got to keep their frequency, and the FCC could not hand out that frequency. That's channel 37. There is no channel 37 because they needed it for this telescope. And so, yeah, while that's going on, they can't stop and wait for that to get resolved. They have to keep building it. So this is one of the cross beams going up. That's where the actual antennas were. And then you can see they were pretty tall. I think they were around 125 feet off the ground. And again, just how muddy this site was. Eventually, they were going to install asphalt down there to keep it from, getting like this. And of course, while that's going on, the real work on the log cabin is continuing. They're still working on that behind the scenes. And yeah, so I mean, everything was going great with that and with the cabin. There's Ron's window frames. Look really good in there. Made the right decision, maybe? Probably not. So yeah, so then they finally start putting the asphalt in. They put a wire mesh over it to keep the mud away. And they quickly realize that it's not quite flat. Now this is like a very precise telescope. It's got to be like perfectly aligned so that the radio waves bounce off the right way. And it's just asphalt on dirt. And they're setting it up, and they get it, and they realize it's kind of like falling apart. It's kind of eroding, so they got to go back and fix it. These are just students kind of relaying the wire mesh. And erosion would just be a problem for the entirety of this site's existence. They just were never able to solve it the right way. Might have something to do with the fact that they had all the trees cut down by astronomy students who didn't know anything about forestry or how roots hold dirt in place or anything like that. But I don't know. Yeah, so they would have to go back and do this actually every summer just to fix it up and keep it calibrated. So by 1962, they were really finishing it up. This is the last section of the cross tower where the antennas are going to be eventually. They're going to be just hanging down from up here to catch everything. And then the media tour continues. Here's Y.T. Lowe with some visiting researchers in front of his array. This is Swenson and Ron Bracewell, who was the director of the observatory at Stanford. And then this is Swenson and McVitie and 2 more visiting researchers. Again, everyone just wanted to come to Danville and see what the university was doing. So in July 1962, it was pretty much done. They were just running some final tests to get all the bugs out. And then on the night of July 13th, it rained 5 inches in 5 hours, and the entire valley flooded. From here, there was about 40 feet of this asphalt, and the mesh was just completely ruined. So they had to go out and fix it all and wait another couple months. So they actually weren't able to use it till that October, even though it was pretty much ready in July. If that hadn't happened, they would have been ready to use it. They just had to, again, get all the bugs out. So they did that. They fixed it up. They set up a new dam to stop future floods from happening a little bit downstream at a great cost. Just not good for them. But eventually it did start going in October 1962. It was operational. And also by October 1962, the cabin was completed. They did it. And yeah, I mean, clearly, great work for a bunch of guys. They didn't know what they were doing. Logs are great. They even set up this little brick wall in front. But yeah, so those 2 things kind of going on at the same time. And again, it worked. I mean, they did exactly what they set out to do with it. McVitie, Swenson, and tons of visiting researchers were able to use it as a radio site. They could map out the sky just like they planned to. There was a ton of stuff that went on there. Yeah, it all worked great. But again, every summer, they had to go out there and fix it because it would just become, as it eroded, it would become like uncalibrated. It would be off a little bit. So they had to go out there and kind of fix the asphalt and the wire. So again, what did they bring with them every summer to fix it up? A tar kettle, a shovel, and a rake. They did it all by hand to just fix it up. This very precise, it had to be perfect to get it all smooth and flat, and they're just using hand tools to do it. But I mean, for the most part, they did it every summer, and they got it working again. But eventually, year after year, it's kind of, it's getting worse and worse. They realize it's not going to work for much longer. So by 1970, it's kind of all falling apart. They're not able to fix it anymore with their hand tools. The Naval Research Office is threatening to pull funding because there's nothing really happening anymore. And most importantly, the research is done. They had finished their mapping project, and there was nothing really left to do with the site. So, but the university still owns this land, so they're trying to think, what can we do with this? They don't only own just this; they own like the entire area around it. So they have like this giant space, and they're trying to think, we got all this land, what else can we do? So Swenson applies for another grant, this one with the National Science Foundation, to build a dish radio telescope, which is actually this one behind him. Now, this is going to be more or less for the same thing for mapping purposes, and he originally wants 3. He only gets the funding for 1, and he barely gets that, so they have to pivot to just 1. And then again, students participate in this, but they take a much more serious role. In fact, this one is entirely students and professors. They do not bring in any work teams because they can't afford them. So here we have Swenson on a backhoe. They actually, again, students and faculty built this entire thing. They used military surplus supplies because they couldn't afford real materials, couldn't afford work crews, so they had to do it themselves. And again, it worked. They got exactly what they needed out of it. They were able to use it for mapping. They were able to use it as a part of an array with other radio telescopes. They also were able to use it as like a mass spectrometer to kind of read chemical compositions of stars and stuff like that. So importantly, yes, they were able to do that too, and the site got to have kind of a second life as this radio telescope. And again, it worked, and they were kind of done with it. It was vandalized in the late 1970s. They got it back in order, but it wasn't quite what it was. They said, again, we're done with what we needed it for. So that was kind of the end of that in 1981. So again, 2 major telescopes. They just kind of went for 10 years each. Now, Swenson's legacy is kind of, there's a hall named after him, maybe the university's least visited named hall, Swenson Hall. Originally, the control building, just a piece of paper taped up on the door. It was originally like the building that the main valley was controlled from. It's still there today. It's kind of like a guest house for visiting researchers because the university does still own all this land. You can go out there and do, it's more like natural research, so nothing astronomical anymore. But they kind of keep it as like a guest lodge, if not a little outdated, but it's nice. It's kind of like a tribute to the site. They have articles about the site's history and stuff like that. And that is still there today, again, as Swenson Hall. So that's pretty much what happened. I mean, if you were to go there today, it would look nothing like that. It's really unrecognizable. You could just be walking out and you wouldn't even notice looking into the valley what was once there. This is kind of the asphalt ridge along the edge. It's barely visible still. And then this is the actual valley itself. Swenson Hall is kind of up this way, so that's where they controlled it from. So they were kind of pretty far away from it. The wooden towers, they kind of just left those to fall apart over time, and they did. The supports are still there. And again, just falling on the ground. Some of them are still standing a little bit, but you know, cracked up obviously over time. The wiring and the asphalt that they had to redo every year, that's actually still there, but again, you wouldn't notice that. You just be walking on it to see. It's not like very visible because you know leaves are on it, trees are growing out of it. And then the site of the dish, now just a concrete pad is left in the garage, which they actually do still use as well to just house various machinery. And then of course the cabin, not there anymore either. Very little left. The last of Ron Schorn's photos actually shows the fireplace. The students, when they were building this cabin, they spent a lot of time on the fireplace. They really put a lot of work and effort into it. They said that it was a big deal. Whatever happened to the rest of the cabin, they wanted the fireplace to be the last part remaining. And 60 years later, it still is. And that's all I had. Kind of short, I know, but let me know if you guys had any questions. And thank you again for being here. It's my first time doing this, in case you couldn't tell. So, thank you.
So is that site accessible?
It is what?
Is that site accessible then to people like us?
I don't know about like the general public. I just asked. So the university still owns it. It's like there's a padlock over the road. You got to get a key from the natural resources guy. I just asked if I could go out there and take pictures. He said sure. So I mean, I think if you ask him, he'll just let you go out there. But I don't know. I mean, it's not very secure either. Like if you know where it is, you could just like walk up and jump the fence. But
So like where South of Danville is it then?
No, it's actually not too far. I think it's about 6 miles. It's down Perryville Road, so yeah.
Did they, when you were getting access, did they say if there were any future plans for the land?
I don't think so. I mean, it's been 50 years at this point since they did anything there. I mean, they still have it. Again, they use it as like a researcher facility. You can do research there still. But I haven't heard anything about new plans for it. I mean, I can't imagine there are at this point.
Well, for 40 years, I owned a couple of hundred acres immediately south of the telescope.
Okay, yeah.
And there were, I don't know how many of these were actually but there was a large number of these. I have absolutely no idea of what he did, but the maintenance of this property made it only a functional facility for about 7 years. And it had ceased to function when I acquired my land, but it separated this from the Vermillion River over in Danville, east of Danville. Was quite a liability. It was not dismantled. At some point, they actually blew the heavy cables bracing this delicate wooden structure. But that was a sufficient liability. They just blew the cables and allowed the whole thing to collapse into the valley. And one of my regular tours of the site was walking from my land on the river. I own the riverfront, a quarter of a mile back to where the telescope was located. And, University of Illinois was fairly proud of their discoveries, and so this is also mentioned. Swenson's radio telescope is in this book of university achievements or discoveries.
Yeah, and they didn't clean this stuff up. I mean, if you want to see these antennas, they have some in the actual campus observatory just on display. There's one in Swenson Hall. They just kind of left this stuff on the ground, and people went by and picked it up. So there's one actually in the director of the natural areas. He's got one in his office too. So yeah, there's a bunch of them around just in people's offices still to this day that they just picked up off the ground.
So you study history, right?
Journalism.
Journalism.
Yeah, minoring in history.
What made you interested in those university histories?
Yeah, well, like Will said, I wrote a blog post last year about the history of astronomy in the county. I picked that because I couldn't really think of anything else. My grandfather was always interested in astronomy. He's got like his own personal observatory in his backyard, so I figured I'd write about kind of just the history of astronomy here in the county. That wasn't very specific though, so I tried to find, what was the most interesting part of that. I think was this observatory, and I wanted to do kind of a follow-up to that, so I'm working on that right now. I just did the presentation, obviously, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of tell that story. I mean, I thought it was a good story. I thought it was pretty interesting, so I just wanted to tell it.
You know about the Walnut Point Observatory?
Yeah, so that was one in Oakland, right? That they just demolished. Yeah.
They demolished it?
I think they just did. Yeah.
Totally trashed
Yeah.
after they took the telescopes out.
Yeah. Yeah, they took those out a while ago, and then so the university had a couple more observatories I didn't mention. There was one on Florida Avenue near Farr and Parr, those dorms. There was one there that was kind of a small time, and kind of like a backup to the main one. And then they had one all the way down in Oakland, the Prairie Observatory, which they took the equipment from the original campus observatory when they did the remodel in the 50s, and they just moved it down here to the one in Oakland. And it was in the middle of nowhere, so people vandalized it. And then they had to take the equipment out in the 1980s and kind of just left it there, and people continued to vandalize it, and then they just tore it down last year, I think, 2 years ago maybe, but yeah.
I was there a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm a little curious, are these radio telescopes the same type of thing that, and I don't know if this project is still going on, that somebody was using to search for intelligent life out in the universe?
I mean, I think that's like a similar idea. I mean, they weren't really trying to do that here. They were just trying to do like mapping stuff, like just trying to get like a general idea. I mean, I guess if they were looking for like a specific signal coming back, they could try to find it. So I think that is radio astronomy, doing stuff like that. I think that's more like looking for a specific signal than trying to like find one. But yeah, again, I'm not an astronomy guy, so.
Any other questions? All right, then let's give Brendan one more hand. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight for our second to last history talk of the year. We will not be having one in November because of Thanksgiving, but we will have one final talk with Michael Burlingham, who is a professor who has revised Henry Clay's biography of Abraham Lincoln in his new book, Lincoln the Citizen. He will be speaking with us via Zoom on December 18th at 7 p.m. So you'll be able to enjoy it from the comfort of your own home. But thank you all for joining us tonight. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I might as well identify myself and talk a little bit about the antenna itself and how it worked, because that's really the fascinating thing about this. So let me come up here.
Yeah.
And some of you know me. Hi, Dan. Good to see you again. How are you, Jeanette? So my name's Ben Halpern. I studied electrical engineering at the university. I was here 1981, 82, and I did a master's in electrical engineering. Professor Lowe was one of my professors, Y.T. Lowe, and he actually talked about this antenna. It's called a conical log spiral, and he brought one into class, told us about how they worked, and why this was so important. Why did it lend itself to this project? Okay, the way this project worked was, if you can go back
Yeah.
and get a picture of the antenna. Go back. You just had it.
Oh, on the disc, yeah.
No. The whole. The
Yeah,
whole.
there it
Okay.
is.
Yeah, and if somebody has, well, I'll just use my hand to point. Okay. So the way this worked is this valley had to be shaped like a parabola. Okay, because you had these elements here. It's called an array of these conical log spirals mounted on this horizontal boom, and the antennas pointed down, and these antennas, the way they worked is they received, they projected energy or received energy, in this case received energy, from the base pointed upward, and they had a fairly direct beam, okay? Fairly direct in terms of meaning that they could receive energy from straight down, okay? Now, that was good when you were building something like this, because what they wanted to do here was to, on any given day, to look at a specific portion of the sky, okay? And the way this works is, if you have a whole lot of these elements mounted on a boom like this, all pointing in the same direction, or all receiving energy from the same direction, this parabolic reflector, if you will, acts like a mirror and receives energy from a line, if you will, in the sky. And with a lot of these here, you could narrow that line almost down to a point. So on any given day, they could receive energy from a point in the sky and see what was coming there. All right? And it turns out, of course, that that the Earth goes around the sun. So what that means is that this antenna is pointing in a different part of the sky every day. And the way they would map the sky is by A, using the Earth's revolution around the sun to map an arc, if you will, around the universe. And then it turns out that this antenna has another property. They're able to steer this beam as to where the antenna is receiving energy from. So one day maybe it's receiving energy from straight overhead, but then it turns out that if I rotate this antenna a little bit, I can change the phase, if you will, of the energy that it receives. Now, if I change the phase of each of these a small amount, I can maybe move the focus of this beam by maybe 1 degree or each day. Now, I don't know exactly how much they rotated it, but it was a fixed amount each day. They would actually send students up to the top here and walk along a catwalk, and the way they did the mapping was they physically rotated these antennas by a fixed amount. Professor Lowe told us about this and how they actually did it.
Was there a mechanical thing to line them all? I mean, they didn't just somebody climb up there and turn them, did they?
Yeah, they did. That's exactly what they did.
Well, it was a scary thing because
Yeah.
I did climb to the top of the tower and crawl across to the far end and back.
Jeez.
But when I
No,
did that,
it was very dangerous.
oh, I was been dead. And they were beginning to do this. It was flexible. And clearly it was a liability of the university just.
But that was how they did it. They actually rotated these by a fixed
and it was-
amount.
and that's the way it was located, with the
Yeah,
flat edge up.
yeah, so this was pointing down.
Yeah.
Yeah, these were suspended from here pointing down, and then you had you had cables that received the energy. The other thing was that at this time there was also technology being developed in in receivers, so they were able to start utilizing some very what you would call low noise technology, and be able to look at some very, very small signals and make sense out of them. So that's how this worked. Now the mesh wasn't there simply to hold back the valley. The mesh was actually a conductor. The mesh is an electrical conductor, okay? And ideally you would have a solid metal surface here. That's what you would want. Well, that's not practical, nor is it necessary. It turns out that the mesh electrically looks like a solid surface to the frequency that this operates at. And that mesh would reflect energy back up at these antennas. Well, the reason this had to be such a good or a perfectly shaped surface, a parabolic surface, is because imagine, if you will, energy coming from a fixed location in the sky that you're trying to look at, and energy is coming in like this. You want it to be reflected back up here to these array elements. Okay, well, if this parabola is misshapen, you may get some energy that gets directed away from the elements, and that's signal that's lost. So the way this works is you have a lot of these elements. Ideally, you have all of the energy focused at them, and then when you look at the composite signal from all of them, that energy adds up, and you now have a strong enough signal where you're able to look at that one direction in the sky on a given day. Then the next day you change it slightly, then again. But you see, with the weather, there were a lot of days when they weren't able to do this, or days when it got misshapen and they had to resurface it. So from a practical standpoint, it had a lot of drawbacks.
So when you say you're looking at a point in the sky, so what does that look like to the scientist? It doesn't show up on a TV screen to us.
Well, either there's energy coming from that point or there's not. If there's energy coming from that point, the astronomers knew how to interpret it. Now that I do not know about. But you actually had a picture which showed this, and it actually showed in the background here. There, go back to there. So you see what this is, I imagine, is what they actually observed over a period of time, where these streaks of light, if you will, represent stars or sources of energy that were mapped using this technology.
Exposure and the stars tracing across during the exposure time.
Yeah. you know, assuming that the stars are what produce these sources of energy. So that's something, you know, you would have to ask to a radio astronomer.
Cool. Now, what you are holding is the actually object or just a model?
No, this is actually one of the antennas.
Wow.
I have one in my garage. When I was in Professor Lowe's class, we actually did a field trip out to that site, and we were able to.
You know, Professor Lowe was one of the experts of antennas.
Absolutely.
And then he now currently in the engineer school, there were two pieces framed he made, the early pieces, and his wife or widow told me he made now he's a famous professor for those, but he made these pieces from in the garage from the material he bought from a garage sale.
Well, that was the story behind the log periodic dipole array. Yeah, I mean, we heard all about that. It was there were several professors who worked on that, but this one was actually invented by Professor Dyson. I had him for a class too, John Dyson. They were both very, very accomplished. But
what were you studying under him, Professor?
Well, I studied electrical engineering. I actually worked in the field of antennas for several years.
How many of those did they have?
There were a lot. I forget how many, but there were a lot of these. And the spacing of them is critical. It's very critical because the spacing of them defines the direction of the beam. And that spacing, it depends on the wavelength that they were using. But yeah, Professor Dyson was the person who invented this. Professor Lowe was one of the people. There were the technology in this device was invented by a number of different people. There were a number of different technologies that went together to produce this antenna.
So did they have to replace these periodically? That looks like it's in an incredibly good shape.
I don't
for
know.
being wood that was exposed to the elements.
Yeah, I mean, can they pass it around, Dan? Here, take a look at it here. And yeah, I don't know. They lasted a long time.
Looks like kind of.
What's the metal?
Is that copper?
Copper?
I don't know.
No, the metal is copper.
Copper?
Yeah.
May have been silver plated at one time.
I don't know,
Yeah.
it sort of looks like oak to me, but some wood's more.
But remember, they were up for the 7 years that it actually functioned, plus another 10 or 15 years before they blew the structure down.
That's right.
So that was in the weather for 20 years or
Don't
better.
drop it.
Wow.
We do not
I'll try
use
not to. If I drop it, it's only from accident, by accident.
Yeah, here they are.
You drop it,
Looking
you'll be forced
up,
to make
it-
another one.
Yeah, so
Full
that's how this worked. But it was it was
Line up
Can you
your-
see
if you
them?
come up here,
Yeah.
you can barely see them. But
So there must have been a pattern or something that they could
here,
drill those
there-
holes, because those have to be perfectly lined up.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
I see.
yeah. They had to be lined up just right in
Yeah,
order to
yeah.
work, and it was
Lesson tonight.
it was a very, very tedious
Science is in
process.
everything, don't you know?
They were inside the framework,
They probably were.
or
Well, they were mounted on the underside of the boom.
So they'd have to hang off it and
Each one, they were hanging.
yeah, they'd have
Oh, I
to get
see.
down onto it and change
Yeah.
them that way.
Would you
No.
volunteer for that?
No,
Get
I
up
wouldn't.
there and
No.
change those?
You
But I
can
mean,
pay
just
me to
yeah,
do it.
just
Yeah,
building this,
halfway up the table.
I didn't realize what went into building it. That it was all done basically by student volunteers, student and faculty volunteers. Now let me say also though that Professor Jordan and Professor Swenson, Professor Lowe, these people were became world known in their respective disciplines. Professor Jordan became a department head. He was department head before I came. When I came, Professor Swenson was the department head. So these people rose to great prominence in their field. They contributed a tremendous amount to the field of electrical engineering and to the use of to various uses of antenna technology over the years. I used a textbook when I was in college that Professor Jordan co-authored. I used another one that Professor Lowe co-authored. These people were world known. They were not small potatoes. So when you showed Jordan Hall, no, don't belittle, or Swenson Hall. No, don't belittle George Swenson. George Swenson was world known in his field. Ed Jordan was world known in his field. Y.T. Lowe, the same thing. And I'm sure a lot of these other individuals here, they were world known. They're some of the people who put the Department of Electrical Engineering on the map as far as the University of Illinois is concerned.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah.
That was a great job here. Thank you very much.